The handcuffs clicked shut, tight enough to bruise bone. Officer Brad Miller leaned in, his hot breath smelling of stale coffee and arrogance, and whispered, "Nobody cares about a drifter like you. You're going away for 20 years and I'm getting a promotion." They thought he was just another statistic. They thought he was Robert King, a nobody passing through their corrupt little town of Oakhaven. They were wrong. They didn't know the man in the orange jumpsuit wasn't a criminal. He was Special Agent Robert Thorne, a decorated FBI operative on a deep-cover RICO assignment. And the video recording hidden in his jacket button, it was still running. You're about to witness the most satisfying courtroom takedown in history. When the predator becomes the prey, the silence is deafening. Stay tuned, because the twist in Minute 9 changes everything. The air in the Oakhaven County Courthouse was thick, smelling of old wood, floor wax, and the quiet desperation of people realizing their lives were over. The fluorescent lights buzzed with a headache-inducing hum, flickering slightly above the defense table. Sitting in the defendant's chair, Robert Thorne kept his posture rigid. He wore an ill-fitting orange jumpsuit that smelled of industrial detergent and sweat. His wrists were shackled to the table, the metal cold against his dark skin. To the jury, he looked exactly like what the district attorney was painting him to be. A dangerous transient, a drifter with a violent streak, and a trunk full of narcotics. To the man sitting 2 tables away, Officer Brad Miller, Robert looked like a trophy. Miller sat behind the prosecutor, leaning back in his chair with a smugness that bordered on obscenity. He was chewing gum, his uniform pressed perfectly, his badge gleaming under the harsh lights. Beside him sat Chief of Police Roy Higgins, a man with a neck thick as a tree stump, and eyes that had seen everything and cared about nothing. "All rise," the bailiff droned. Judge Clayton P. Moore swept into the room. He was a relic of the old guard in Alabama, a man with silver hair combed back severely and a face etched with lines of permanent disapproval. He sat down, adjusted his glasses, and looked at Robert with distinct distaste. "Be seated," Moore grumbled. "We are back on the record in the matter of the state versus Robert King. The charge is assault on a police officer, resisting arrest, and possession with intent to distribute. Mr. Vane, is the state ready to proceed with its first witness?" District Attorney Elias Vane stood up. He was a tall, skeletal man who moved with the jerky precision of a marionette. "We are, Your Honor. The state calls Officer Brad Miller to the stand." Robert remained silent. His public defender, a young, overworked woman named Sarah Jenkins, placed a trembling hand on his arm. "Don't worry, Mr. King," she whispered, her voice barely audible. I'm going to try to object when I can. But Judge Moore, he usually sides with the officers." Robert turned to her. His eyes were calm, unsettlingly so. "Just let them talk, Sarah. Let them say everything they want to say. Don't stop them." Sarah frowned, confused. "But trust me," Robert said softly. Officer Miller took the stand. He placed his hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, and sat down. He looked at the jury. 12 ordinary citizens who looked terrified of making the wrong decision, and gave them a practiced, "aw shucks" smile. "Officer Miller," D.A. Vane began, pacing in front of the jury box, "walk us through the night of November 14th. Miller cleared his throat. "Yes, sir. It was around 11:00 p.m. I was on patrol near the old lumber yard on Route 9. We've had reports of drug activity there. I saw the defendant's vehicle, a beat-up 2015 sedan, parked suspiciously behind the warehouse. And what happened next? I initiated a stop." Miller lied effortlessly. "I approached the vehicle. The defendant, Mr. King, appeared agitated. His eyes were dilated. I asked him to step out of the car. Robert watched Miller carefully. He was studying the officer's body language, the micro-expressions, the way Miller tapped his left index finger on the railing of the witness stand. A tell. He was reciting a script. "Did he comply?" Vane asked. "No, sir," Miller said, shaking his head theatrically. He became belligerent. He started shouting that I had no right to be there. Then he reached for his waistband. I feared for my life, sir. I thought he had a weapon. I had to forcefully remove him from the vehicle for my own safety. The jury gasped softly. A middle-aged woman in the front row shook her head, looking at Robert with fear. "And after you subdued him?" "We searched the vehicle," Miller continued. "We found 2 kilos of cocaine wrapped in duct tape under the driver's seat, and a registered Glock 19 with the serial numbers filed off in the glove box." "Lies!" Sarah whispered furiously, scribbling on her notepad. "There was no gun. The police report said the gun was in your waistband. Now it's in the glove box?" "Let him talk," Robert repeated, his voice low and dangerous. "Officer Miller," Vane said, leaning in. "Did the defendant say anything to you while you were transporting him to the station?" Miller smirked. He looked directly at Robert, his eyes cold and dead. "Yeah. He told me he'd kill me if he ever got out. Said he had friends in high places." Vane turned to the jury, pausing for dramatic effect. "A threat on an officer's life." "Thank you, Officer Miller." Judge Moore looked over his spectacles at Sarah. "Cross-examination, Ms. Jenkins?" Sarah stood up, her papers shuffling awkwardly. "Yes, Your Honor." She walked to the podium. She looked small against the backdrop of the massive courtroom. "Officer Miller, you said my client reached for his waistband, but your body camera footage, it was turned off during the altercation, wasn't it?" Miller didn't blink. "Equipment malfunction, ma'am. Battery died right as I exited my cruiser." "Terrible timing." "Terrible timing indeed," Sarah said, her voice gaining a little strength. "And the dashcam?" "Corrupted file," Miller said, bored. "It is looking into it. So we have only your word that my client, a man with no prior criminal record in this state, suddenly decided to attack an armed officer?" "My word," Miller said, his voice dropping an octave. "And the 2 kilos of cocaine we found in his car." Sarah looked helpless. Without the footage, it was, "He said she said." And in Oakhaven the badge always won. "No further questions," she mumbled. As Miller stepped down, he passed the defense table. He slowed just enough to wink at Robert. It was a subtle, quick movement, but Robert caught it. "Enjoy it while it lasts, Brad," Robert thought. "You just hammered the first nail into your own coffin." The afternoon dragged on, a slow-motion execution of justice. The prosecution called witness after witness. A forensic analyst who claimed the drugs tested positive for high-grade cocaine. A station clerk who claimed Robert had been violent and abusive during processing. Every word was a fabrication. A carefully constructed tower of lies designed to bury Robert King under a life sentence. Robert sat through it all, his face a mask of stone. He wasn't just a defendant, he was an observer. He was analyzing the hierarchy. Chief Higgins was the architect. Miller was the muscle. D.A. Vane was the cleaner. They had done this before. You could tell by the rhythm of it. They picked drifters, people without families, people who wouldn't be missed, and pinned their own cartel shipments on them to clear the books. It was a perfect racket, until they picked the wrong drifter. "The state calls Chief Roy Higgins to the stand," Vane announced. A ripple of murmurs went through the courtroom. Higgins was a local celebrity. He played golf with the mayor, organized the charity drives, and kept the town safe. He walked to the stand with the heavy, confident gait of a man who owned the building. "Chief Higgins," Vane smiled. "Thank you for being here. "Duty calls, Elias," Higgins rumbled. His voice sounded like gravel in a mixer. "Chief, you oversaw the processing of the evidence in this case. Can you verify the chain of custody?" "I can," Higgins said. "I personally logged the narcotics into the evidence locker. I wanted to make sure everything was by the book, considering the volume of the seizure." "And did you speak to the defendant?" Higgins turned his gaze toward Robert. It wasn't a look of anger. It was a look of pity, the way a butcher looks at a cow. "I did. I tried to see if he wanted to cooperate, give up his supplier, maybe cut a deal." "And what was his response?" "He laughed at me," Higgins lied. "Told me I didn't know who I was messing with. Said his organization would burn this town to the ground." "Objection!" Sarah Jenkins shouted, jumping up. "Hearsay and prejudicial." "Overruled," Judge Moore snapped without looking up. "It goes to the defendant's state of mind and intent. Sit down, Ms. Jenkins." Sarah sank back into her chair, her face flushing red. "I can't believe this," she hissed. "They're making you out to be a cartel boss." "It's the narrative," Robert whispered. "They need a big win to justify the federal grant money they applied for last month. Anti-drug trafficking funds. They need a bust." Sarah looked at him, startled. "How do you know about the grant money?" Robert didn't answer. He just tapped his finger on the table. Higgins finished his testimony, painting Robert as a hardened career criminal. The jury was eating it up. They looked at Robert not as a man, but as a monster who had invaded their peaceful community. "The prosecution rests," Vane announced, buttoning his suit jacket with a flourish. Judge Moore looked at the clock. "It is 3:30 p.m. Ms. Jenkins, are you ready to present your case?" Sarah stood up. She looked tired. She had no witnesses, no evidence, just the word of a man who refused to give his real name. "Your Honor, the defense would like to request a recess until tomorrow morning to—" "Request denied," Moore barked. "We are finishing this today. Call your witness or rest your case." Sarah looked at Robert, panic in her eyes. "Robert, I have nothing, unless you want to testify. But if you do, Vane will tear you apart." Robert slowly uncrossed his legs. The shackles clinked loudly in the silent courtroom. He took a deep breath. "I'll testify," Robert said. His voice wasn't a whisper anymore. It projected to the back of the room. "Mr. King, I advise against it," Sarah warned. "I'll testify," Robert repeated, standing up. "But I don't need to take the stand just yet. I have a preliminary motion regarding evidence." Judge Moore scowled. "You have a lawyer, son. Let her speak." "My lawyer doesn't know about the evidence I have, Your Honor," Robert said smoothly, "because I couldn't risk it being corrupted like Officer Miller's dash cam." The room went dead silent. Miller shifted in his seat, his gum chewing stopping for a second. Chief Higgins narrowed his eyes. "What are you playing at?" Judge Moore demanded. "I am requesting permission to connect a digital device to the court's AV system," Robert said. "I believe it contains exculpatory evidence that will refute the testimony of Officer Miller and Chief Higgins." "We've already been through discovery," Vane shouted, jumping up. "Anything he has is inadmissible. He's stalling." "It's not stalling if it proves perjury," Robert said calmly. He looked directly at the judge. "Unless the court isn't interested in the truth." Judge Moore looked at the angry prosecutor, then at the confident defendant. He was an arrogant judge, but he was also curious, and he knew the court reporter was typing every word. If he denied evidence that the defendant claimed proved perjury, it would be grounds for a mistrial appeal instantly. "You have 5 minutes, Moore grumbled. "If this is a waste of time, Mr. King, I will hold you in contempt on top of your sentence." Robert turned to Sarah. "Reaching into my back pocket is difficult with these cuffs. In my right pocket, there is a small, black USB drive. Take it." Sarah hesitated, then reached into his pocket. She pulled out a sleek, military-grade encrypted drive. "Give it to the bailiff," Robert instructed. Miller leaned over to Higgins. "What the hell is that?" he whispered harshly. Higgins didn't answer. His face had gone pale. He was staring at the drive. He recognized the brand. It wasn't something you bought at Walmart. The bailiff took the drive and plugged it into the presentation laptop. A screen descended from the ceiling. "Open the folder labeled Oak Haven Sting Alpha," Robert said. The bailiff clicked. "Now," Robert said, his voice turning into steel. "Play file, Miller, arrest, backup." The screen flickered to life. The audio crackled, and suddenly the courtroom was transported back to the night of November 14th. But this wasn't the dash cam footage. This was a wide-angle, high-definition view from a button camera on Robert's chest. On the screen, Officer Miller was visible, leaning into the car window. "Get out of the car, boy," the digital Miller sneered. "Officer, I'm complying. What is the probable cause?" Robert's voice on the recording was calm. "Probable cause is, I don't like your face. Get out before I drag you out." The courtroom gasped. On the screen, the video showed Robert stepping out with his hands up. No reaching for the waistband. No struggle. Then, the video showed Miller shoving Robert against the hood. It showed Miller reaching into his own patrol bag, pulling out a brick of white powder, and tossing it into Robert's back seat. "Look at that," the digital Miller laughed. "Looks like you're riding heavy tonight. That's a life sentence right there." The video continued. Miller pulled out his phone. He dialed a number. "Chief." "Yeah, it's Brad. I got one." "Yeah, nobody. Just a drifter. We can pin the shipment from the warehouse on him." "Yeah, come on down." The video froze. In the courtroom, silence wasn't just an absence of sound. It was a physical weight. Officer Miller was standing up, his face the color of a tomato. That's fake. It's AI, deep fake." Robert turned slowly to face the gallery. He looked Miller dead in the eye. "It's not a deep fake, Officer Miller," Robert said. "And my name isn't Robert King." He looked at the bailiff. "Unlock these cuffs. Now." "Sit down," Judge Moore shouted, banging his gavel. "Order. I will have order." "You have no authority here anymore, Judge," Robert said, his voice thundering. "Because this isn't just a state trial. This is a federal crime scene." Robert looked toward the double doors at the back of the courtroom. "Now!" he shouted. The double doors at the back of the courtroom didn't just open, they exploded inward. "Federal agents, nobody move! Hands where I can see them!" The roar was deafening. 12 men in full tactical gear, emblazoned with the bold yellow letters FBI across their chest plates, swarmed into the room like a tide of black steel. The gallery erupted in screams. Civilians ducked under benches. The jury scrambled over one another, pressing themselves against the back wall of the box. Officer Brad Miller froze. His hand had instinctively twitched toward his service weapon, a fatal mistake. Before his fingers could even graze the leather of his holster, 3 red laser dots appeared on his chest. "Don't do it, Miller!" A voice boomed from the tactical team leader. "Drop to your knees, now!" Miller looked at the lasers, then at Chief Higgins. The chief was already on the ground, his face pressed into the dirty linoleum, hands laced behind his head. The fight had left him instantly. He knew what a federal raid looked like. He knew this wasn't a negotiation. Miller's knees buckled. He sank to the floor, his hands trembling as he raised them. In the center of the chaos, Robert stood perfectly still. The bailiff, a young man named Peterson, who looked like he was about to faint, was staring at Robert with wide, terrified eyes. "The keys," Robert said calmly. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. With shaking hands, Peterson fumbled for the keys on his belt. He stepped forward and unlocked the shackles on Robert's wrists. The metal clicked open, and the heavy cuffs fell to the table with a dull thud. Robert rubbed his wrists, the skin chafed and raw. He rolled his neck, a sickening crack echoing in the sudden silence that had fallen over the room as the FBI team secured the perimeter. An older agent in a suit, not tactical gear, walked briskly up the center aisle. He carried a duffel bag. He stopped in front of Robert. "Agent Thorne," the man said, handing him the bag. "We were worried you were going to let them sentence you just to see how far they'd go." "I almost did, Henderson," Robert replied. He unzipped the bag. Right there in the middle of the courtroom, Robert stripped off the orange jumpsuit top. Underneath, he wore a black, tactical moisture-wicking shirt. From the bag, he pulled out his own badge, a gold shield on a leather lanyard, and placed it around his neck. Then, he clipped his service weapon, a Sig Sauer P2266, onto his belt. The transformation was complete. The drifter, Robert King, was gone. Standing in his place was Special Agent Robert Thorne, a senior operative for the Bureau's Public Corruption Unit. He turned to the defense table. Sarah Jenkins, the public defender, was sitting with her mouth open, clutching her notepad to her chest like a shield. "I'm sorry for the deception, Sarah," Robert said, his voice softer now. "You were the only person in this building I wasn't investigating. You're a hell of a lawyer. You fought for me when you thought I was nobody." Sarah blinked, tears forming in her eyes. You're FBI?" "Yes, ma'am." Robert turned his attention to the prosecution table. DA Elias Vane was standing frozen, his skeletal face drained of all color. He looked like a wax statue melting under heat. Robert walked over to the witness stand where Officer Miller was being zip-tied by 2 agents. Robert leaned down, bringing his face inches from the corrupt cops. "You said nobody cares about a drifter," Robert whispered, echoing Miller's words from the arrest. "You were right, but the United States Department of Justice cares a whole lot about a police department running a drug distribution ring, using the county evidence locker as a warehouse." Miller spat at him. "You entrapped me. This is entrapment." "It's not entrapment when you plant the evidence yourself, Brad," Robert said coldly. "Agent Henderson, get him out of my sight." "What is the meaning of this?" The shout came from the bench. Judge Clayton P. Moore was standing up, banging his gavel furiously. His face was purple with rage. "You cannot storm my courtroom. I am a judge of the circuit court. I will have every single one of you held in contempt. Bailiffs, arrest these men." The bailiffs didn't move. They were currently being patted down by federal agents. Robert turned slowly to face the judge. He walked up the steps of the bench, moving higher until he was eye level with the man who had looked down on him for 2 days. "Clayton Moore," Robert said, his voice projecting clearly. "You are under arrest." "On what charge?" Moore sputtered. "Incompetence? Rudeness? You have no jurisdiction over my court." "Oh, it's not just your court, Clayton," Robert said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He slammed it onto the judge's bench. "That is a federal RICO indictment," Robert announced. "Racketeering, influence, and corrupt organizations. We've been listening, Judge, for 6 months. We have your phone taps. We have your bank records in the Cayman Islands. And we have the testimony of your bagman." Judge Moore's eyes went wide. "Bagman? I don't know what you're talking about." "We picked up the mayor's aide this morning," Robert said, delivering the blow. "He flipped in 30 minutes. He gave us everyone. The chief, the DA, and you. The silent partner who takes a 15% cut of every kilo seized and resold by the Oak Haven Police Department." A gasp went through the remaining gallery members. The pillars of their community weren't just dirty, they were rotting. "Cuff him," Robert ordered. 2 agents moved up the steps. Judge Moore, the tyrant of Oak Haven, was spun around and handcuffed in his own chair. Robert turned back to the room. The adrenaline was fading, replaced by the cold, hard satisfaction of the takedown. But he knew it wasn't over. "Secure the exits," Robert ordered Henderson. "Nobody leaves. We have to process everyone. And get the tech team in here. I want every hard drive in the clerk's office seized before they can run magnets over them." "Thorne," Henderson called out, holding a tablet. "You need to see this. The stream." Robert walked over. "What stream?" "The courtroom feed," Henderson said grimly. "We cut the local feed, but someone else is broadcasting. And it's not us." Robert looked at the tablet. It showed a live view of the courtroom from a high angle, likely a security camera hidden in the ventilation grate. The viewer count was ticking up rapidly. 5,000. 10,000. 50,000. "Who is broadcasting this?" Robert asked. "We don't know," Henderson said. "But look at the chat. They aren't just watching. They're cheering for the judge." Robert frowned. He looked closer at the comments scrolling on the side of the feed. "Free Judge Moore. The feds are the enemy. Oakhaven strong." It's a militia signal, Robert realized, his blood running cold. Moore isn't just a crook. He's their ideology. Suddenly, the glass of the courtroom's double doors shattered inward. But it wasn't the FBI this time. A Molotov cocktail smashed against the back wall, erupting in a ball of fire. "Fire! Get down!" The scream tore through the room as black smoke instantly began to curl toward the ceiling. The fire alarm blared, a piercing shriek that made communication nearly impossible. "Secure the prisoners!" Robert roared, coughing as the acrid smoke hit his lungs. "Henderson, get the judge and the chief out the back way. If they die, our case dies." The FBI team switched instantly from arrest mode to extraction mode. They grabbed Judge Moore, who was now screaming, not in anger, but in terror, and hauled him toward the judge's chambers. "The front doors are blocked," an agent shouted over the comms. "We have hostiles outside, civilians with AR-15s. They've barricaded the courthouse steps." Robert drew his weapon. This wasn't a bust anymore. It was a siege. "Sarah!" Robert grabbed the public defender by the arm. She was paralyzed with fear, staring at the flames licking up the back paneling. "Come with me!" He dragged her behind the heavy oak defense table, flipping it over to create a barricade. "Stay down. Do not move unless I tell you." "Who are they?" Sarah cried, her voice trembling. "Who is attacking us?" "Moore's insurance policy," Robert grimaced, checking the magazine of his cig. He knew if the feds ever came for him, he could rally the local patriot groups. He spun a narrative that the government was trying to take over their town. He's weaponized them. Another bottle smashed through the window, this one filled with paint, blinding the agents trying to return fire. "Thorne, this is Henderson," the radio crackled. "The back exit is compromised. Someone chained the fire doors from the outside. We are trapped in the holding area." "Damn it!" Robert hissed. He looked around the courtroom. The fire was spreading. The sprinklers finally kicked in, dousing the room in a shower of dirty water, turning the floor into a slippery mess, but doing little to stop the gasoline fire at the entrance. DA Elias Vane, who had been left unguarded in the chaos, saw his opportunity. He scrambled toward the side door, the one leading to the clerk's office. "Vane! Stop!" Robert shouted. Vane ignored him. He burst through the door and immediately screamed. A gunshot rang out. Vane stumbled back into the courtroom, clutching his shoulder. He fell to the wet floor, writhing in pain. A man stepped through the side door. He wasn't FBI. He wasn't police. He was wearing hunting camouflage and holding a sawed-off shotgun. Behind him were 3 others, similarly dressed, faces covered with bandanas. "Let the judge go!" the leader screamed. "We know you have him. Release Judge Moore and we won't kill everyone in here." The tactical agents near the jury box trained their rifles on the intruders. It was a standoff, a Mexican standoff in a burning courtroom, with water raining down and the air thick with smoke. Robert stayed low behind the table. He was calculating angles, 4 hostiles, shotguns and hunting rifles. High ground advantage was with the FBI, but the hostiles had the element of surprise and desperation. "Listen to me," Robert shouted from cover. "My name is Special Agent Thorne. You are committing a federal act of terrorism. Put down your weapons." "We don't recognize your authority, Fed," the leader shouted back. He racked the slide of his shotgun. "I'm giving you 10 seconds. Send more out, or we start shooting civilians, starting with this lawyer piece of trash." The gunman pointed the shotgun at Vane, who was bleeding out on the floor. "He's one of yours," Robert yelled. "That's the district attorney. He failed to protect the judge," the gunman spat. "He's expendable." Robert looked at Sarah. She was huddled in a ball, praying. "Henderson," Robert whispered into his radio headset. "Do you have a shot on the leader? Side door." "Negative," Henderson replied. "Too much smoke. I can't risk hitting the jury." Robert took a deep breath. He had to do this himself. "Okay," Robert shouted, standing up slowly, his hands raised, his gun hanging from one finger by the trigger guard. "Okay, let's talk. You want more? You can have him." "Robert, what are you doing?" Sarah hissed. "Shut up," Robert whispered. He walked out from behind the table, stepping into the open aisle. The water soaked his tactical shirt instantly. The leader of the militia swung his shotgun toward Robert. "Bring him out," the gunman ordered. "He's back there." Robert gestured with his head toward the chambers. "But he's handcuffed. I have the key." Robert reached into his pocket with his free hand. He pulled out the key that Peterson had used to unlock his shackles earlier. He held it up. "Let me go unlock him," Robert said calmly. "You can take him and go. We just want the civilians safe." The gunman narrowed his eyes. "Toss the gun." Robert tossed his Sig Sauer to the side. It skittered across the wet floor, sliding under a bench. "Smart move," the gunman sneered. "Now, move." Slowly. Robert walked toward the side door, moving diagonally. He was closing the distance. He wasn't walking toward the chambers. He was walking toward the gunman to get the angle to the chambers. "Stop!" the gunman yelled. "That's close enough. Toss the key." "It's slippery," Robert said. "I don't want to drop it." "Toss it!" Robert flicked his wrist. He threw the small metal key, but he didn't throw it at the gunman. He threw it high, toward the fluorescent light fixture directly above the gunman's head. The gunman's eyes instinctively tracked the shiny metal object flying through the air. That split-second distraction was all Robert needed. He didn't dive for his gun. He dove for the gunman. Robert hit the man low, tackling him around the waist. The shotgun discharged into the ceiling, blowing out the lights and plunging that corner of the room into semi-darkness. "Move in! Move in!" Henderson roared. The FBI team surged forward. Flashbangs detonated. Bang! Bang! Blinding white light cutting through the smoke. Robert wrestled with the leader in the water. The man was strong, fueled by adrenaline and fanaticism. He clawed at Robert's eyes, trying to gouge them out. Robert blocked a strike and delivered a short, brutal elbow to the man's jaw. Bone crunched. The man went limp. Robert rolled over, grabbing the shotgun. He pumped it and aimed it at the other 3 militiamen who were staggering, blinded by the flashbangs. "Drop it!" Robert screamed. "Or you die right now!" The 3 men dropped their rifles. They raised their hands, coughing in the smoke. Agents swarmed them, zip-tying them and shoving them against the wall. "Clear!" Henderson shouted. "Room secure!" Robert stood up, his chest heaving. He wiped blood from his lip. He looked down at Vane, the corrupt DA. Vane was pale, gasping for air. "Paramedics!" Robert yelled. "Get a medic in here!" He looked over at the defense table. Sarah Jenkins slowly peered over the edge. She saw Robert standing there, battered, soaked, holding a shotgun, surrounded by smoke and defeated enemies. She stood up, her legs shaking. She walked over to him. "You," she stammered. You threw the key. Diversion, Robert said, trying to catch his breath. You could have been killed. Part of the job. Robert handed the shotgun to an agent and walked over to where Henderson was dragging Judge Moore out of the chambers. Moore looked disheveled, his robe wet, his dignity gone. Is it safe? Moore whined. Are they gone? Robert grabbed Moore by the lapels of his expensive robe. You listen to me, Moore. You incited this. Every drop of blood spilt here today is on your hands. I'm going to make sure you never see sunlight again. I'm going to bury you under the federal prison system, so deep they'll have to pump air down to you. Moore stared at Robert, and for the first time, the arrogance was truly gone. He saw the end. Get him out of here, Robert said, shoving him toward the agents. The fire department burst through the front doors, dousing the flames. The siege was broken. But as the smoke cleared, Robert looked back at the camera in the vent, the one broadcasting the stream. The red light was still blinking. Henderson, Robert said, pointing at the camera. That wasn't the militia. What? The militia attacked because they were watching at the stream, Robert said, his mind racing. But they didn't start the stream. Someone else set that camera up. Someone else wanted this to happen. Someone wanted Moore to be a martyr. He walked over to D.A. Vane, who was being loaded onto a stretcher. Robert grabbed Vane's bloody shirt. Vane, look at me. Who set up the camera? Who is the real money behind Moore? Vane coughed, blood bubbling on his lips. He looked at Robert with a terrifying clarity. It wasn't Moore, Vane whispered. Moore works. For him. Who? Robert demanded. Who is him? Vane's eyes rolled back, but he managed one last word. Senator. Vane passed out. Robert stood up, staring at the unconscious man. A senator? Sarah asked, standing beside him. A U.S. senator. Robert looked at Henderson. The victory of the raid suddenly felt very small. They had cut off the head of the snake, only to find out it was just the tail of a dragon. We need to get to a secure line, Robert said. This goes all the way to D.C. 72 hours after the Oakhaven siege, the smell of smoke still lingered in Robert Thorne's memory. But the air in Washington, D.C. was different. It smelled of expensive cologne, exhaust fumes, and power. Robert sat in a dimly lit conference room inside the J. Edgar Hoover building. Opposite him sat Assistant Director Joyce Vance and a terrified Sarah Jenkins. Sarah had been moved to a safe house immediately after the raid. She was the only civilian witness who knew the full extent of Judge Moore's operation. Elias Vane is dead, Vance said, tossing a file onto the table. Died in the ICU an hour ago. Embolism, or at least that's what the chart says. It wasn't an embolism, Robert said, his voice low. Someone got to him. He was about to give up a name. He gave you a name, Vance corrected, or a title. Senator. Do you have any idea how little that narrows it down, Thorne? There are 100 senators. Half of them are on payrolls they shouldn't be on. It's not just any senator, Robert said, standing up and walking to the whiteboard. Look at the timeline. Judge Moore started his Tough on Crime initiative 2 years ago. That coincides exactly with the passage of the Safe Streets and Communities Act, a federal grant program for rural police departments. Robert drew a line connecting Oakhaven to the act. Oakhaven received $3 million in grants, Robert continued, for a town of 5,000 people. They bought military gear, surveillance tech, and they built a new evidence storage facility. The warehouse, Sarah whispered, where they kept the drugs. Exactly, Robert nodded at her. The federal government paid to build the cartel's distribution center. And who sponsored the Safe Streets Act? Who pushed it through the Judiciary Committee with aggressive lobbying? Robert taped a printed photograph onto the whiteboard. It showed a man with silver hair, a winning smile, and eyes that looked like shark glass. "Senator Harlan Sterling," Vance said, her face paling. "The chairman of the Oversight Committee. Robert, you can't be serious. Sterling is untouchable. He's the front-runner for the vice presidency." "He's using rural towns as wash cycles," Robert explained. "The grant money goes to the towns. The towns hire contractors owned by shell companies. The shell companies donate to Sterling's super PAC. And the drugs? That's just the bonus revenue stream to keep the local cops loyal." "It's a perfect circle," Sarah said, horrifying realization dawning on her. Judge Moore wasn't the boss. He was just a franchise manager. "And now Sterling is cleaning house," Robert said. "He burned the courthouse to kill the evidence. He killed Vane to silence the witness. And now—" Robert's phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. It was a notification from a news app. "Breaking news. Senator Sterling calls for emergency hearing on FBI overreach in Oakhaven tragedy." Robert showed the phone to Vance. "He's not running," Robert said. "He's attacking. He's spinning the Oakhaven raid as a rogue FBI operation that endangered civilians and caused the fire. He's going to drag me in front of the Senate and crucify me on live television to cover his tracks." Vance rubbed her temples. "If he subpoenas you, you have to go. And he will control the narrative. He'll have the questions rigged. He'll make you look like a domestic terrorist." "Let him subpoena me," Robert said, a cold smile forming on his lips. "He thinks he's dragging a beat cop into his office. He forgets I spent 10 years undercover. I know how to wear a mask." "Robert," Sarah said, reaching out to touch his arm, "if you go in there and you miss, if you don't nail him, you're going to prison for the rest of your life. He'll pin the fire on you." "I know," Robert said, "but I need one thing. I need the ledger." "The ledger burned in the courthouse," Vance pointed out. "No," Robert shook his head. "Judge Moore was greedy. He wouldn't trust Sterling to pay him his fair share without insurance. He kept a personal record. It wasn't in the courthouse." Robert turned to Sarah. "Sarah, think. You knew Moore. You knew the town. Where did he go when he wanted to be alone? Where did he feel safe?" Sarah closed her eyes, thinking back to the years of watching the tyrant judge rule her town. He had a boat, a small fishing trawler down at the murky lake on the edge of the county. He called it the Gavel. He spent every Sunday there." Robert grabbed his jacket. "Vance, stall the subpoena. Give me 24 hours. "You have 12, Vance said. "And Thorne, don't miss." The Senate hearing room was a cavern of mahogany and marble, designed to make human beings feel small. The air was conditioned to a frigid chill. Cameras from every major news network lined the back wall, their red recording lights looking like unblinking eyes. Senator Harlan Sterling sat at the center of the raised dais. He looked every inch the statesman, impeccable navy suit, American flag pin on his lapel, and a grave, concerned expression plastered on his face. Below him, sitting at a small wooden table with a single microphone, was Robert Thorne. Robert wore his dress uniform, his face impassive. Behind him sat Sarah Jenkins, acting as his legal counsel, though her presence was mostly symbolic. "Mr. Thorne," Sterling began, his voice a smooth baritone that echoed through the room. "We are here today to discuss the tragic events in Oakhaven, a town burned, a district attorney dead, a judge hospitalized, and at the center of it all, you." Sterling paused for effect. The shutters of the cameras clicked furiously. "Senator," Robert said calmly into the microphone, "I was executing a federal warrant on a RICO predicate." "A warrant?" Sterling scoffed. "You entered a sovereign courtroom with a tactical team. You initiated a firefight that led to the burning of a historic building. Tell me, Agent Thorne, did you authorize the use of flashbang grenades in a room full of civilians? I authorized the rescue of hostages from a militia group, Robert replied. A militia group that you provoked. Sterling slammed his hand on the desk. We have reports that the citizens of Oakhaven were peaceful until your team arrived like an invading army. You are a cowboy, Agent Thorne. A dangerous relic who thinks he is above the law. Sterling was good. He was twisting the facts, playing to the cameras, painting Robert as the villain. The narrative was setting like concrete. I have sworn statements here. Sterling held up a stack of papers. From Officer Brad Miller. He claims you planted evidence. He claims you assaulted him. Officer Miller is currently facing charges for trafficking 200 kilos of cocaine, Robert said dryly. I wouldn't rely on his character. And yet, Sterling smiled, a predatory grin. You are the one with a history of violence. You are the one who destroyed a town. This committee finds your actions reprehensible. I am recommending that you be stripped of your badge and indicted for involuntary manslaughter regarding the death of Mr. Vane. The room gasped. This was it. The kill shot. Sarah squeezed Robert's hand under the table. Her palm was sweating. Now, Robert, she whispered. Do it now. Robert leaned forward. He didn't look angry. He looked bored. Senator, Robert said, before you pass judgment, I would like to enter one piece of evidence into the record. Sterling waved his hand dismissively. We have seen your evidence, Agent. It is inadmissible. This isn't from the Oakhaven courthouse, Robert said. He reached into his briefcase. This is from the hull of a boat called the Gavel. Sterling's face twitched. Just a micro-expression, a tightening of the jaw. But Robert saw it. I don't know what you're talking about, Sterling said, his voice slightly higher. I think you do, Robert said. He pulled out a leather-bound notebook. It was water-damaged, smelling of lake water and mildew, but the pages were legible. This is Judge Moore's personal ledger, Robert announced to the room. It details every single transaction from the Oakhaven evidence locker for the past 5 years. Objection, a lawyer for the senator shouted from the side. This is a surprise exhibit, not cleared by the committee. I'm not finished, Robert said, his voice rising, commanding the room. Page 42, date August 12th. Payment of $500,000 is sent to Apex Solutions. Page 43, date September 1st. Payment of $750,000 sent to Apex Solutions. Sterling stood up. Bailiffs, remove this man. He is grandstanding. I ran a trace on Apex Solutions this morning, Robert continued, shouting over the senator. He pulled out a second document, a bank record. Apex Solutions has only one beneficiary, a super PAC named Liberty for Tomorrow. Robert looked directly into the camera lens. Senator Sterling, are you not the chairman of Liberty for Tomorrow? The room exploded. Reporters jumped to their feet, shouting questions. The flashes were blinding. Sterling's face had gone from confident to ash grey. He looked around the room, realizing the trap hadn't been for Robert. It had been for him. He had called the hearing to destroy Robert, but he had just given Robert a national stage to unveil the smoking gun. This hearing is adjourned, Sterling screamed, slamming his gavel. Adjourned! You can't adjourn the truth, Senator, Robert shouted. The FBI has already frozen the accounts. We have the wire transfers. It's over. Cut his mic, Sterling yelled at the technicians. Cut the feed. The microphone went dead, but it didn't matter. The noise in the room was deafening. Suddenly, the doors to the hearing room opened. But it wasn't bailiffs coming in. It was the FBI director herself, flanked by 4 agents. She walked down the center aisle, ignoring the chaos. She walked right past Robert, giving him a curt nod of respect. She walked up the steps of the dais. She stopped in front of Senator Sterling. "Senator Harlan Sterling," she said, her voice cutting through the noise. "I have a warrant for your arrest." Sterling looked at the agents, then at the cameras, then at Robert. The arrogance finally shattered. He slumped back into his chair, a small, defeated man. "You can't do this," Sterling whispered. "I'm a senator." "Not anymore," Robert said from the table below. "Now, you're just another suspect." As the agents moved in to cuff the senator on live television, Robert sat back in his chair. He looked at Sarah. She was crying, a smile breaking through the tears. "We did it," she said. "We actually did it." "Not yet," Robert said. He wasn't looking at the senator. He was looking at his phone. A new message had just popped up. It wasn't from Vance. It wasn't from the office. It was from an unknown number. "You took down the pawn. You took down the knight, but you forgot the king. The game isn't over, Agent Thorne. Check your daughter's school schedule." Robert's blood froze in his veins. The victory evaporated instantly. He stood up so fast his chair toppled over. "Robert?" Sarah asked, alarmed. "What is it?" "My daughter," Robert breathed. "They know about Lily." Robert Thorne didn't wait for a direct order. The second he read the text, adrenaline spiked, overriding the fatigue of the last week. He didn't bother reholstering his weapon. He just ran. "Lily, St. Anne's Academy!" Robert roared, shoving the phone into Agent Henderson's hand. "Track this number. Secure her. Now!" Henderson, accustomed to Thorne's high-stakes intensity, didn't hesitate. "Go, Agent. I'll mobilize DC protection. But you get to the school." Robert sprinted out of the Senate hearing room, pushing past stunned reporters and the flustered agents still processing the arrested Senator Sterling. Sarah Jenkins, recovering quickly, grabbed Robert's briefcase and followed him. They commandeered an unmarked FBI vehicle. Robert drove with the reckless speed of a father racing against a countdown he couldn't see. "Who is the king?" Sarah gasped, gripping the dashboard. "Who is higher than a senator?" "Someone who doesn't dirty their own hands," Robert ground out. "Someone who thinks 5,000 feet is a safe distance. Someone with the reach to know Lily's schedule." They reached St. Anne's in under 8 minutes. Robert burst through the gates, badge flashing. Lily was safe, playing on the jungle gym, blissfully unaware of the terror her father felt. The school was immediately locked down. As Lily was secured by the detail, Robert stood outside, the sweat turning cold on his skin. He looked at the text again. "Check your daughter's school schedule." It wasn't a kidnapping threat. It was a taunt, a precision strike designed to pull him out of the Capitol building. Suddenly, Henderson's voice crackled through the comms. "Thorne, it was a feint. A high-level IP trace shows the message server linking back to a private line owned by Preston Hayes. Hayes, the senior lobbyist for the Safe Streets Act." Preston Hayes. Robert repeated the name. The name associated with every piece of legislation that enabled the fraud. The man who wrote the contracts, ran the super PACs, and kept the political machine oiled. The ultimate fixer. "The king! But here's the kicker," Henderson continued, his voice tight with alarm. "Hayes didn't just want you out. Our cyber team just detected a massive encrypted data wipe attempt originating from the FBI's high-security evidence bunker in Quantico, where we transferred all of Moore's and Sterling's digital evidence this morning." Robert slammed his fist on the hood of the car. He was stalling us. The threat to Lily was calculated to buy him the exact travel time needed to get to Quantico and erase the final, master ledger before we could decrypt it. "He must have a mole inside our own department," Sarah whispered, utterly shocked by the depth of the corruption. "He doesn't need a mole," Robert snarled. "He just needs the digital keys. Henderson, reroute the team to Quantico. I'm taking the bird. Now!" Quantico. The secure evidence bunker was miles deep, protected by layers of military-grade security. Robert arrived via helicopter, dropping onto the tarmac and sprinting toward the access point. Henderson met him at the security door. "He's inside, Thorne. We've locked him in the decryption room, but the firewall is failing. He's using a digital back door he paid someone to install 2 years ago," Henderson shouted. They breached the final door. Preston Hayes, impeccably dressed in a $5,000 suit, was standing over a console, his fingers flying across the keys. A small black box was plugged into the federal network, the digital kill switch. Hayes looked up, his face devoid of fear, only cold fury. "You were supposed to be watching your child, Agent Thorne. That was an expensive distraction, and now you've ruined my beautiful, elegant exit. You built an entire drug cartel on the backs of federal grants and used dirty cops and judges as your disposable staff," Robert said, walking slowly toward the man. "You used a senator as a shield, and you were willing to threaten a child to cover your tracks." "It's just business, Agent," Hayes sneered. "I provided liquidity. I ensured political continuity. I protected American interests from messy, low-level crime by managing it myself." He looked back at the screen. 5 more seconds, and this entire investigation is vapor. You will have nothing but the word of 2 drug dealers and a politician. He pressed the final sequence. Wipe sequence initiated. Robert didn't charge him. He stopped 3 feet away. "You're a brilliant architect, Hayes," Robert said, nodding slowly. "You think you've considered every variable. But you forgot one thing." Hayes frowned, confused. "What?" "The evidence wasn't the target," Robert said, stepping aside, revealing Agent Henderson, who was holding a high-definition recording device. "You were. We knew the man who ran an operation this large wouldn't rely on a simple text message. We knew you'd be tracking us." Hayes's eyes widened. "That text message wasn't a feint to the evidence," Robert explained. "It was a lure to bring me here, so you could watch me fail. But the minute that message hit my phone, every keystroke you've made, every access code you've entered, and this entire confession has been streamed directly to the Department of Justice's grand jury." Hayes stared at the recording device. The sophisticated trap he had set for Robert had become the self-destruct mechanism for the king. "The digital kill switch you just activated?" Robert said, a slow, deep satisfaction settling in his voice. "It didn't erase the evidence. It triggered a DeepNet upload to a secure DOJ server. You just signed your own confession, Hayes." The karma was immediate, swift, and overwhelming. Hayes didn't fight. He just looked at the blinking upload icon, realizing his empire was gone in a single digital stroke. He was the most powerful man in Washington, brought down by his own hubris and the one black FBI agent he had underestimated until the very last second. Henderson cuffed the king of corruption. The reign of Harlan Sterling, Judge Moore, Chief Higgins, and the ultimate puppet master, Preston Hayes, ended not with a bang, but with a mouse click. Robert Thorne, the man they tried to jail for 20 years, didn't just walk free. He stood tall, the ultimate victor in a game he was never supposed to win. The Oakhaven case became a national scandal, peeling back the layers of corruption that snaked from a small southern town all the way to the highest levels of Washington. Officer Brad Miller, facing life in prison, turned state's evidence, delivering crucial testimony that sealed the fate of Chief Higgins and the ailing Judge Moore. Moore died in federal custody months later, his reputation and fortune gone. Senator Sterling and Preston Hayes were convicted on multiple counts of RICO and conspiracy. The irony was brutal. The political establishment, which had built its power on the illusion of law and order, was dismantled by the exact system it tried to corrupt. Justice often slow, finally delivered the hard karma these villains deserved, thanks to the patience and resilience of Special Agent Robert Thorne. If this epic tale of corruption, betrayal, and ultimate justice captivated you, then you know the importance of shining a light on the darkest corners of power. Don't let this story fade into the news cycle. Give this video a like right now to help the algorithm share Agent Thorne's fight for truth. Share this incredible story with everyone who needs to see the power of federal oversight. And the most crucial step, subscribe to my channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss the next time we uncover a shocking story where the victim becomes the hero. What was your favorite twist? Let me know in the comments below.